electro and epicardial pacing. We're slated for about 45 minutes. Usually goes a little bit faster than that. Experience with epicardial pacing. Brad, I know yours. You came from the bedside.
I have minimal, just
Minimal.
right here.
Cool. So, slow me down, speed me up, tell me how we're doing based on like your background knowledge, because everybody comes from a different place. So, objectives, we're going to talk about indications, components, the system, the settings, how to test the settings, and then troubleshooting. And then my favorite part where I get a little bit nerdy is when we talk about advanced use of atrial wires. But I'm also in good company because I think most of the people that teach this class nerd out about that part. So, temporary pacemakers are the most dangerous piece of equipment we use. This is because it can trigger an RONT, which leads to VF. You have a sensitivity setting to avoid that. But there is the DOO setting in which the sensitivity is turned off, in which case you're not looking at your patient's rhythm, and therefore you can deliver a pacing spike at the incorrect time and send things into downward spiral. So, just a reminder that this is not a little benign piece of equipment. We use this frequently in post-cardiac surgery patients. Also can be used in patients with heart block, symptomatic bradycardia. In our patient population, we increase the heart rate to help our cardiac output sometimes. Sometimes we also overdrive pace to suppress arrhythmias. Sometimes patients are asystolic underneath their pacer. And then when we get to the fun part about the advanced use, that's when we can talk about diagnosing arrhythmias. So, components of the pacing system. So there's the energy source, which is the pacer box. That provides the stimulus for contraction. You can modify it. That's because we have all the turning knobs. Then there's the leads or electrodes. So in epicardial, on the top, I guess middle picture, your epicardial wires are attached directly to the heart to deliver the impulse. Transvenous pacers are the bottom picture, which are inside the ventricle. I think I pulled out some transvenous wires too for you guys to look at. So no matter where the leads are, they're in contact with the myocardium so that you can deliver an electrical stimulus. Generic pacemaker codes: paced, then sensed, then response to sensing. Everyone familiar with these letters? Okay. Single chamber pacing modes. So AAI, so atria, and then inhibit. So your top picture there, you're A pacing. The bottom picture, personally, is a little deceiving because you do have P waves there. So even though it's VVI, it actually does look like your pacer is at least sensing your P waves and pacing appropriately after that. But those are some V spikes. So that the bottom A sense V pace, that's similar to the picture we just saw. A pace V pace. So atrial wire creates a P wave, ventricular wire creates the widened QRS. And then the bottom right there is A sense V sense, which means you have no actual pacer spikes because you're inhibiting. Questions? Okay, so back to like elementary school, an electrical current has to flow in a whole circle in order to be a circuit. So current flows from the negative pole to the positive pole. If you are having trouble, and this is kind of jumping forward to troubleshooting, but it's because it's how it works. If you're having trouble with the pacer wires, one of the things you can do is reverse the polarity. So on these, one is positive and one is negative. So if these are attached, here, will you be my heart? So if it's going from the negative to the positive, thank you.
Keep like trying to twist it.
If you're going from the negative to the positive and it's not working for some reason, you can unscrew these, unscrew that, and flip-flop them. And then you're reversing the circuit so that the electricity is flowing the opposite direction. Does that make sense? Thank you. You can play with that if you want. And anybody can play with it. So, in a bipolar lead system, which is what we use here, both leads are on the heart, hence reversing the polarity works. You get called small pacing spikes. When you're connected to the pacer, like we said, it doesn't matter which one goes in which. Unipolar lead systems, which we do not use here, they trialed them and did like 3 and then decided they didn't like them. One pole is in or on the heart, the second pole is usually a skin wire as like a grounding unit. In that case, you cannot reverse the polarity because the other lead is not on the heart, so it does matter which one you're connected to. Make sense? Larger pacing spikes, you cannot pace via skin lead. So, for the rest of the presentation, because there are the older generators and the newer ones, it has pictures of both. So this is the older generator, which you can look at or play with. Which again we don't use. So if you can also play with this newer one. So there's a lock button, all the same knobs, on-off button. This is the one that we use here. Main things to know: on-off button, pretty self-explanatory. The emergency button is DOO. So pressing the emergency button will turn the pacemaker on more quickly because it doesn't run through its system checks. It will default to, if you just turn it on with the on button, it'll default to 80, 10, and 10 for your MAs with your default sensitivity. If you hit the DOO button, it will turn on to 80, 20, 25 with the sensitivity off. So that's the big difference, is it maxes out your MAs and it turns off your sensitivity. We'll talk more about the DOO function. The knobs change the setting that they are located right next to. There's a key, that's your lock and unlock button, so family members can't change the settings. Battery indicator, it will blink red when it's less than 25%, 20%. It'll give you a red flashing light with plenty of time. There is also an internal battery, so that when you, even if you are 100% pacer dependent, you can change the battery without stopping pacing. So there's like a 2-minute internal battery that'll keep you going, which is more than enough time to switch. And then the bottom screen is all your sensitivity and additional settings, which we'll talk about those as well. And those are all adjusted with the arrows and the turning knob down there. The pause button, my least favorite, pauses pacing for as long as you hold it, up to 10 seconds. Again, I don't like that function. I prefer to like turn it down to check my underlying rhythm, but there's the safety mechanism built in that if you keep holding it, it'll automatically resume pacing. So as we said, default settings when you turn it on, rate of 80, atrial output and ventricular output are both set at 10. The AB interval, which is like the same as your PR interval, defaults to 170. As you adjust the rate up or down, it automatically adjusts your AB interval appropriately unless you change it. Once you change the AB interval, it will no longer self-adjust. And then sensitivity is set for A's at 0.5 and for B's at 2. That's like your default settings. And usually what they come up from the OR with, because the OR doesn't usually test them. Pacing rate, it's the top knobby. Usually you set it to 80 to 100 unless it's a backup rate, in which case we usually do 50 or 60. You can use the pacer heart rate to optimize your cardiac output. And you can suppress AFib by pacing 10 beats above, as long as their blood pressure tolerates it, because sometimes their blood pressure does not tolerate deep pacing. Atrial stimulation is adjusted with a second knob. So that's the amount of electricity that's sending out in order to gain capture. You can diaphragmatic pacing. You can do that by accident. No dangerously high level that can burn the heart. So if your MAs are set too high, that's fine. You're not going to have any side effects from that. And then your V's. AV conduction block. Pace atrially for sinus brady if you have AWIRES. You almost never have AWIRES here. Okay, so rhythm analysis. Is there appropriate stimulation on the top one? Do you have a P wave for every A spike?
Yeah.
And do you have a QRS for every B spike? Mm-hmm. Wonderful. What about the bottom two? So the one on the left.
Looks like your beat.
Yeah, looks like you're repacing off your A waves, so that's fine. And then the other one is A pacing. So that all looks pretty good. This is what it looks like when you have failure to capture. So pacer spike with no QRS, pacer spike, no QRS, and then you've got two that have capture and then two more that don't. How do you fix this?
Adjust your sensitivity.
This is your milliamps. You would increase your
Oh,
milliamps.
yeah.
Increase your milliamps.
Yeah.
Because your pacer spike, it's sending the
It
spike
sees it, yeah.
appropriately, it's just not getting capture.
Okay.
So, stimulation threshold, aka capture, is the amount of energy needed to reliably pace. So, just like we said, if it's going to send that amount of electricity, is that amount of electricity enough to cause to stimulate a contraction of the heart? In order to test this, you start from 100% pacing and then gradually decrease until you lose capture. This is how it's written in like all the manuals. Some people around here do it opposite. If the patient has a rhythm, they will start without pacing and turn up your MAs. But because that cannot be generalized to all scenarios, so say your patient doesn't have an underlying rhythm, you can't start low and turn it up. So that's why always start 100% pacing and then turn it down until you like click, 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 and then you lose capture and you turn it back up and then you're 100% paced again. That's where you get your capture. Set the MA is 1.5 to 3 times the threshold value. Here we double it. If it is a higher number, like 15, we add 5. Per cals, we should be doing 1.5 to 3. Questions about testing the threshold? Okay. Testing the threshold is the same for A-wires or B-wires. Personally, if I have both and the patient has a good conduction system and there's no conduction issues, I turn off the A's, test the V's, and then turn off the V's, test the A's separately, just to kind of make things clearer, because sometimes you can't see the little P wave after the A spike if you're trying to AV pace. AV interval, as we said, it will adjust the AV interval automatically as you adjust your rate. preferably you want to use your AV conduction over ventricular pacing. So say you have a patient with like a first degree heart block and their PR interval is like 0.21. That's one of the few indications that you would increase the AV interval to like 0.22 or 0.23 so that you would A-pace rather than AV pace to allow time for the patient's intrinsic conduction system to follow its normal path. Does that make sense? That being said, we don't have a lot of A wires here. B, we don't mess with the AV interval very often, and a lot of the bedside nurses are not comfortable doing this. So that might be something the APPs get called in to help with. Your more experienced nurses probably will adjust the AV interval, but it's like very, very few people that would actually do that here. There is a built-in block point for, depending on your rate, the block point changes, but the pacer will not let you go too far, so that it's unsafe. Sensitivity. Again, failure to sense can cause an R on T. If your pacemaker doesn't see what your heart's doing, inappropriate timing, defib. So, testing the sensitivity. Sensitivity is the amplitude or height that the pacemaker requires to detect a contraction. So the reason that sensitivity is confusing to a lot of people is if the pacer is more sensitive, the number is lower. So you have this like inverse relationship. So higher number is less sensitive, lower number is more sensitive. So do you see the line right there? It says sensitivity 6 millivolts. So right now, if your sensitivity is set at 6, the pacemaker doesn't see anything below that line. So it is not seeing any of those QRSs or any of those P waves. Sensitivity of 4, you're getting closer. At a sensitivity of 3, now you're seeing the peak of each QRS. And your pacemaker is saying, oh, there's your ventricular contraction, therefore I'm not going to try to pace. So it is sensing them. So the MAs, when we got capture, we doubled it. The sensitivity, when we get sensing, we half it. So that way it sees everything above that line, so it sees reliably all of your QRSs, even if there's, you know, a change in amplitude, you can still see them all. Analogous to a fence, sensitivity. So if the sensitivity is too high, meaning it is not sensitive enough, it doesn't see it fires. If the sensitivity is too low, it may fail to fire when it should. So that's an appropriate setting. If it's too low, so say these are V wires. Now it's looking for a QRS, but it also sees your P waves. So even if your heart rate is 30, if your sensitivity number is too low, it's going to also see the P waves and think that your heart rate is 60 and then not pace. Make sense? Pacemaker sensing what is above the fence. So is this an appropriate ventricular sensitivity setting? No, because it's also seeing the P waves. Questions about sensitivity? I went kind of fast over that, but I feel like these visuals are really good, so they make sense. Alright, failure to sense. Why is this important? I'll give you a hint, they already said it. RNT. They really drive this point home.
Yeah.
So, appropriate pacer spike. Failure to sense this, so the pacer spike is here. Failure to sense this, pacer spike is there. And now we're just completely off the mark. That's how you get an RNT. So what's the first thing you do if you see this?
Just your sensitivity.
Yeah. pacemaker induced, RNT, skull and crossbones. Okay, I already went over this, but this is the step-by-step. So, 2 main points when testing sensitivity. Number 1, you have to have an underlying rhythm, otherwise you don't have anything to test. Number 2, the ventricular output must be, or either one, also for A's, must be set at 0.1, because you don't want it to capture. In order to test the sensitivity, you're going to make it so that it inappropriately paces, and you don't want to actually get capture and do the RNT. So, set the pacer 10 below the patient's rate with your MAs at 0.1, and then go down to your sensitivity. Turn the dial counterclockwise until, and you're looking at the pacer at these flashing lights. See, they both have like green right now because there's nothing connected to it. You turn that until it says pace, and then turn it back until it senses. And once you're sensing, that's the number that you have. Make sense? Okay. This is how to test your threshold again. So for this one, you set it 10 above the patient's rate and turn down until you lose capture. Make sense? What is this and what do you do?
Scream for help.
Correct.
Probably turn off your pacer and shock them.
Well, you can just turn off racing and see what's not real. Is this like PEA index?
I think
Looks like an
Or an
RRT and then
it's an R on T. I think in this situation it looks like there is AFib prior to it,
Yeah.
and then the R on T, like maybe they tried to synchronize cardio over,
And it
but didn't sync.
But it was, yeah.
But yes, all of those things call for help, defibrillate, turn off your pacer. After you defibrillate, adjust your pacemaker to the correct setting. Mostly test your sensitivity. What is this and what should you do?
yeah, your capture.
The A's or the B's?
Louise.
Correct. Failure to
The
capture.
PAs are just what's
Mm-hmm. So what should you do?
turn up your MAs.
Beautiful. Other things you could do, make sure that it's connected appropriately. Make sure you have enough battery. So increasing your V's would be if none of those other things are true. Check the threshold, reconnect the cables, replace the battery, and as we said, we could switch the polarity. Advanced pacing. Yes. Here we go. Okay, so all the things we're about to talk about require A wires.
That's why they don't get them twisted on. Yeah.
So you can use your A wires to diagnose atrial arrhythmias, and also treat them. And we'll go over it, but it can help differentiate between SVT, A-flutter, junctional tach, sinus tach. So, your patient has undergone a CABG times 3 2 days ago and suddenly develops this rhythm with a heart rate of 146. What is it?
Or just, I don't know, they look pretty regular.
Yeah.
So maybe just sinus tach.
Yes.
CP waves, it could be even.
It's really hard to tell.
Yeah.
Gosh darn, good thing we have A wires. So, how can we help identify it? We can use our A wires to do an atrial EKG. So, you can do this with a 12 lead. You can also do it on the monitor. If you're using 12 lead, you connect all your leads as normal, but then you take the V1 lead, because V1 is unipolar. Take V1 and use either an alligator clamp, or you can just like hold them together, so that V1 will be reading through your A wires rather than through the skin, because your A wires are located right on the atria, so you can get an up close view of the atrial activity. Then you want to run a long strip of V1 when you print out your 12 lead. When using the monitor for this, with the 5 lead system, all of your other leads are bipolar except your V lead. So what you do is just take the A wire out of the little holder. This is for both.
Oh, thank you.
So you take this, and you can either wrap the electrode, the jelly part, around this, or you can like unclip it, and you know how there's like the little metal ring? You just touch it, like the game of Operation, and then it will connect from the heart up to the monitor. So then if you have V1 on the monitor, you can print a strip, and it'll have one lead be this, and the other lead would be like your lead 2. And so you can compare them. Does that make sense? Makes sense. Have you done this yet, Brad?
I've seen you do it once.
I nerd out. Probably get so excited. So this is our person from before with a heart rate of 146. So, and this is our atrial tracing. So if you line them up, can I steal your book for a second? I don't know if the book is big enough. Yeah, there you go. So if you line them up, so there's your QRS. So that, from the atrial tracing, this is what your QRS looks like. So there's one, and there's one, and there's one. In between, this is your P wave. So that is an organized contraction. It looks larger, which is how we can identify how many there are. Draw this line up to standard. So there's your P wave, there's your QRS, so your P wave is buried in the T wave. So it's sinus tack because there's one P wave for each QRS. Cool?
Yeah.
What is this? Hard to tell. That's your atrial EKG. So there's going to be a couple QRSs in there, like if you line them up, but you see a lot of organized contractions rather than like a fibrillation, and it's definitely more than 1 to 1.
Right.
So what would you call it?
Yeah,
Variable A flutter. Whereas if you're just looking at the monitor, you might say, they're an AFib. This one's a little bit busy because it is a 12 lead, but this is what it looks like if you do it on a 12 lead. So, can you see? So V1 is your atrial EKG, and then right below it is lead 2 to compare it. So you can pick out your QRSs, and in between, are there P waves that look organized? Like I said, this one's a little bit harder because it's smaller. But so,
2 to 1 A flutter.
2 to 1 A flutter. So this is your QRS.
Right.
Then you've got
1, 2.
1, 2 with your QRS there.
Okay. Yeah.
questions about atrial EKGs? Cool. So the other thing you can do with your A wires is rapid atrial pace. You're laughing.
It's so nerve-wracking.
It is very nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
So you can overdrive pace, reentrant tachycardias. You always want your patient to be in bed. And this is my favorite. Ensure the atrial wires are connected to the atrial cable. That is very, very important because you do not want to rapidly pace the ventricles.
Right.
I'm glad I don't have to explain that further because we're all laughing. It would be terrifying. So if down in your bottom box, if your pacemaker is on, there is, it should be at the bottom, an option for rapid atrial pacing. So if you use your little arrows to get down to that box, when you select it, you want to set your device to 10 to 40 beats above the intrinsic atrial rate. How do you know the atrial rate? We already did our atrial EKG. So usually your atrial rate is going to be about like 300, right? So you set it 10 to 40 above that. And then you press and hold the select button. Rapid atrial pacing will be delivered as long as you hold it. So you hold the select button and then you let go and you're done. Or you can alternatively gradually reduce the pacing rate. Make sense?
So why do we want to do this?
Because you can break someone out of AFib or SVT. That being said, providers only. This is not something that we just go ahead and do by ourselves.
Yeah. What if you're really, because you can also go into some scary films. They don't like it.
Yes. Very rarely done.
Never seen that.
Well, we so rarely have A wires
Yeah.
anyway. So this goes over the same thing with the updated pacer box. Do you want me to go over it again? It's very much the same.
It's easier.
So you adjust the rate, you press and hold the enter key. I don't trust these new fangled battery powered pacemakers.
Mhm.
This reminds me of the ones Marcy always puts in the other
Uh-huh.
one. What questions do you have? Okay, great. How are you doing? It's 10:30. Oh, now we have some quiz questions. What is this and what should you do? Yeah, because it's failure to capture. We also would check our connections to make sure that everything is plugged in appropriately and that our battery has enough battery. Failure to sense? Mm-hmm. So you would adjust your sensitivity.
Yep.
You don't have consistent pacer spikes.
Mm-hmm.
So failure to capture. Or failure to sense.
It's still failure to sense.
Failure to sense because there's no spikes. So your pacemaker's not initiating when it should because it sees something that it thinks it is a contraction that it's not.
So failure to
Failure to
sense.
sense.
Like you're getting something
Mhm.
somewhere,
Yeah,
but not
but not
consistent.
in the middle there.
Yep. Because we can't go over everything today, there's a great article that the two of the people who are very like big in the CALS community and helped bring CALS to the US also have a resource that you can look at if you are interested in reading an article that goes more in depth.
Have you ever played the EKG game online?
Mm-hmm.
On SkillStat.
I remember the words. I used to do it all the time.
Yeah,